So this is a kind of belated launching 450 Voices of Disbelief, but there are other things as well. Anthony has 2 or 3 books, new books out. Those books are available for signing outside as well. Anthony has a long essay, a wonderful essay in that book. I, along with a guy called Udo Schuklenk, a professor of philosophy in Canada, edited the book. The first thing I want to do is actually ask Anthony, you put this effort into writing a long piece for the book, you've been supportive of the book. Why do you support books like this, and more generally, why do you criticise religion?
Well, look, there are many strands to what's been happening in the great debate now current between those who have a religious outlook and those who don't. It's a sometimes very acerbic debate, sometimes a lot of name-calling goes on, and a certain tincture of bitterness enters into it from time to time. But one very significant aspect of it is that although people who have very deep commitments on both sides of the argument are unlikely to be all that swayed immediately, at any rate, by being presented with an argument or the example of somebody who is on the other side of the discussion, there are plenty of people who are waverers. There are plenty of people who are looking for considerations that will help them make up their minds, will help them think through the issues. And a book like this, which has in it a number of authors discussing how they came to their view, why they hold their view, what their development towards that view was, can be enormously helpful to such people, partly because they give an example of people who, having been very thoughtful about these matters, have come to a conclusion and have got a case to make for why they did so, but also by showing that it's possible in an intellectually rigorous way, in a way which has intellectual integrity and honesty to arrive at such a view. They can provide an encouragement, an encouraging example for people who are still thinking and wavering. A few years ago, I was doing, this is going to make you jealous by the way, a really good gig on the Queen Mary 2, which was giving lectures on the Queen Mary 2, going between New York and Southampton. And this is a 6-day crossing, and I had to give 4 one-hour lectures, so you can see it was terrifically hard work. And I was giving a set of lectures on these issues. Some years ago, I wrote a book which was about the history of the competition and sometimes the conflict between fundamentally a humanistic way of thinking about ethics and life and a fundamentally transcendentalist way of doing it, thinking that our guidance and our morality comes from outside the universe. And the Queen Mary 2 has a very, very big body of passengers, so over 2,000. And I was finding that the people in the audiences of my lectures, because there were all sorts of entertainment, including sort of quasi-intellectual entertainment, which I suppose I was on that cruise, about 200 university professors and congressmen and doctors on holiday and retired professional people. A tremendously interesting group of folk who came along. Lots of great questions, lots of good discussion after the lectures. But about halfway through the lectures, a woman came up to me and she said, having been brought up in the Midwest in the United States, where it's just taken for granted as a kind of reflex that you go to church and you know, happy hymns and snappy sermons and you're part of the Christian community. And I've been filled with doubts, but there's been nobody whatever to share them with, nobody whatever to ask questions of in connection with these doubts. And this, she said, has been an absolute liberation, because it just shows that there are other folks out there who addressed these questions, thought them through, and have come to some conclusions about them. And she then burst into tears. Well, it was rather a touching moment in a way to see just how this kind of thing, a book like this, might be a really great help to somebody who was in doubt and who was seeking.
How many people, just as a matter of interest, are going to the Global Atheist Convention? Okay, so most of you are. You're coming here to get your taste of it. So who's here just for the taste but couldn't make it to the convention? Oh, it's about half and half. Yeah, I mean, it's wonderful that the convention sold out very quickly. I believe it sold out in about January. Anthony and I are both speakers at the convention. We'll have a lot to say. There's a great deal to say about this topic. Maybe I could throw the question at Anthony again and say, well, just quickly, what's the take-home message from your speech on Saturday? I think you're on Saturday as I am.
Well, I think I better keep my powder dry on that one, actually, for those of you who are going to come. For those of you who aren't going to come, I've got two points to make. One is there might be a miracle between now and tomorrow. The convention centre might suddenly get bigger. And
we're praying for one.
Somebody's praying for one. I thought, by the way, that the news about the hailstones last weekend was rather worrying evidence that there might be a,
It's evidence of bad timing, Another proof of the non-existence of God, obviously. It should be this weekend if God exists.
I want to ask Russell a question, if I may, and that is, the inspiration for this book obviously comes out of your own commitments. How did you arrive at those commitments, and how did the book spring from them?
Yeah, well, that's a big question. How did I become an atheist? How did I come to be an atheist? And how did I come to be kind of radicalised, I suppose? I became an atheist twice in my life. The first time about the age of maybe 8, certainly no more than 9, because I remember the house that I lived in at the time, and I know when I shifted from that house. And the reason I came to think that the God we learned about at school back in the 1960s when I went to school didn't exist is largely because I was so interested in Greek mythology. And I kind of, at that age, had this insight that what we think of as religion now will be thought of as mythology, in another 2,000 years, maybe less than that. But 2,000 years later, we think of the Greek myths not as being about real beings, but as being this interesting body of mythology. Well, why won't it be the case that however many years down the track, our mythology, what we say about gods and so on, won't be seen the same way? Why should we have it right when no other culture has had it right? I wouldn't have put it that way when I was 8 years old, probably. But that was the insight. I had a sort of backsliding experience when I was about 12 or 13 when I got in with a bad crowd of Christians. And so I had a born-again experience when I was either 12 or 13, I'm not sure if I turned 13, and was involved in Christian activities through high school and early university. But I always had my worries, both the one I've just spoken of and others, including the traditional problem of evil. If there's an omnicompetent, in other words, all-powerful and all-knowing God who's also all-benevolent and so on, and there's suffering and so on in the world, why is that God not both motivated and capable of eliminating evil, or not having the suffering come into existence in the first place? There are many explanations of that have been put forward by believers, by theologians and others over the years. In the end, none of them add up. The whole scenario does not add up, and I could not get it to make sense. I had the end of that struggle, actually, at a time when I had become the vice president of the local branch of the Evangelical Union on my campus. So I never did get to scale the lofty heights of president of the Evangelical Union. I quietly dropped out. But I was not really radicalised. I dropped out very quietly. I've been radicalised in more recent years, over the last 10 or 12 years, by this phenomenon that religion persists. Religion persists with all of its dark side. We thought at one stage, maybe back in the 70s or 80s, whatever, that religion was going away, that the Enlightenment was prevailing, that something called the secularisation thesis was true. That is, that as society become more affluent and scientifically based and so on, religion fades away, which certainly seems to have happened in a lot of the countries in Europe, particularly up in Scandinavian countries. But it's not necessarily so. If the secularisation thesis is true in the long run, it's at least a gross oversimplification. We see religion not only persisting, but regathering its energies in the political sphere. I mean, we saw with the Bush administration in the US, not a theocracy, but something, moving enough towards that to be worrying. And even here in Australia, we see signs that are troubling. We have at the moment 2 leaders of major political parties who are both highly religious, like we've seen outside churches or inside churches, attending conferences of the Christian lobby and so on. The time has come, I think, to do something about it. In an area such as bioethics, where I've done a lot of research, a lot of work, you really see this. You see a very strong religious influence from Christian and other religious bioethicists taking views that strike me as irrational from a secular point of view. Well, I think it's time, if the religious make the sorts of claims they do, to to having moral authority, to being able to tell us how to live our lives, how people should be born, how people should be dying. Well, it's time to say, where does your authority come from? Is that authority legitimate? Do you have that authority at all? If you claim to speak on behalf of a God, does that God even exist? So I've not only become an atheist twice, but much more recently than that, I have become somewhat radicalised. That's the answer to the question.